Welcome to Above Bar Church and to Real Lives 2018. It's wonderful to have you here. Please do come in, grab a seat, grab a drink, grab some snacks. My name's Callum, and I'll be kind of emceeing this evening. That's lovely. And just to explain, right, Real Lives, Sunday night, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday night is an opportunity to hear people's stories of how they have been changed by Jesus. And I'm really honored to interview each guest. Tonight, our guests will be interviewed in two stages. So I'm going to invite Billy up in just a second. He'll be interviewed. We'll have a 10-minute break where you can refresh your drinks, run to the loo if you need to, stretch your legs, and then we'll have interview part 2. Our guest tonight, Billy McCurrie, I've not known for very long. We've chatted over the phone, and we've chatted for the last hour or so. But he is an amazing man with an amazing story. Formerly involved in terrorist activity in Northern Ireland, and now a minister at Alton Park Baptist Church in Ormskirk, which is a great kind of vocal warm-up, yes. But please, would you welcome Billy McCurrie? So Billy, it's amazing to have you here. We actually, I think, booked Billy to come 4 years ago. So it's great to finally have you here. Yeah. I'm sure worth the wait. Now it's been advertised. It's all been kind of talking about how you were involved in the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Could you explain maybe in just a minute what the Troubles was?
Yeah, because some of the younger folks here, it's very much a history lesson for some of these young folk. But for other folks who look old enough, it was more than a history lesson. You also lived through the period of the Troubles. But Ireland's a place that's been plagued by violence going back centuries. There's always been attempts to try and bring about a resolution to the conflict. Coming up to 100 years ago, 1921, Ireland was partitioned. It was cut in two. There's 6 counties to the north, 26 counties to the south, an independent Republican state. But the 6 counties to the north remained linked to the United Kingdom. But within that 6-county state, there was a very sizable Roman Catholic minority that wanted to sever the links with the United Kingdom, hence the term Republican or nationalist. And throughout the history of the state, there were periodic outbursts of violence. And in 1968-69, in fact, I think this is the 7th of, isn't it? So I think it was the 5th of September, 1968. I think the Troubles officially started, so 50 years ago. And I think most people at the time thought, this little spate of trouble's going to last, 6 months or so, 18 months max, as previous outbursts of violence had. And it would all then just die down again and people would get on with their lives. But sadly, as many of you know, the Troubles, as they became known, lasted three decades. So for 30 years, part of this nation was embroiled in a civil conflict, which spilt over not only Northern Ireland, but also Southern Ireland and parts of mainland Britain, as you know.
And so, you grew up, or you were fairly young, kind of when the Troubles really got going. Is that right?
Yeah, I was 10 in 1968 when the Troubles erupted. I had a very loving, very joyful, happy home life with my mum and dad and an older sister and an older brother. And then there was myself and a younger sister. And I say it was a very, very loving home. British troops arrived on the streets of Belfast and Derry. They were deployed in August 1969. And as a young boy, there wasn't any great degree of anxiety when the troops arrived on the streets. It was more of a novelty factor. To see the armoured personnel carriers and soldiers with their rifles and their foot patrols and the barbed wire, etc. That was more of a novelty factor than a fear factor at that time. Yeah. So I was a young boy when the Troubles first started.
And I think people think of Ireland and Northern Ireland as being quite religious. Did you grow up in a religious home? Did you grow up kind of going to church, that kind of stuff?
It was nominally Christian. My dad had absolutely no interest in God or religion. My mum was the one who would have taken us to church on, Christmases and Easters. There wasn't much to do in the area, so there was little children's meetings, which we used to go to on a Thursday night. And, of course, most kids were shoved out to Sunday school on a Sunday afternoon. So that was the limit of any Christian influence or input in my life at that time.
Yeah. So I guess, obviously, the Troubles really hit home for you. Tell us about that.
I've had time here this evening. I would take you through practically every step that I had during the course of that particular day on Saturday, the 27th of June, 1970. Holds so many precious memories. I got up very early that morning and went on a walk with my dad to the local park. Spent all morning and first part of the afternoon with him. It was a lovely, lovely summer's day. But just that Saturday night, my dad was shot dead by the IRA. Now, he wasn't the first civilian to be shot dead. He was among one of the first civilians. It was about 11:30 that Saturday night, because it's sort of the height of the summer. It was still, it was just getting dark, and it was so warm. I was out in the street playing. My mum and all the other neighbours were standing chatting, as was the custom in Belfast at the time. And there was a sudden blast of automatic gunfire. It was about 11:30. And little did I know that was my dad being shot dead. But after that initial blast of gunfire, the shooting continued right through the rest of the night for several hours. And it was later on that night that I found out about my dad being killed. And I guess from that moment on, God really didn't feature in my life. If there was a God who was all-loving, all-powerful, he could have stopped my dad being killed. And so, as far as I was concerned, this book held no answers or held no solutions. Started to write God out of the equation.
Yeah.
Never went back to Sunday school. Totally started to write that out of my life completely.
I realize this is it's a deeply personal issue, and I feel like I'm, as an interviewer, kind of just poking and prodding you, asking questions.
Poke away.
I don't mean to seem insensitive. Was there a particular reason your dad was singled out, was shot?
No, just like so many conflict areas around the world, people shoot from one area into the other area, and sometimes it's as narrow as a road, a main road. People on one side of the road are of one persuasion, and people on the other side are another. And people think, well, if we shoot into that side, whoever we kill is the enemy as they perceive it. And my dad was just coming home that night with friends. They were coming back to our house for just tea and some food after just being out that night. And he had said to his friends, I'll run on ahead and tell my wife to get the pan on, as we say in Northern Ireland. That means get a good fry up. And as he turned the corner, several IRA gunmen opened up, and he caught the full blast of the shooting.
And so, how did you find out? You said you heard the shots, but you weren't there at that time.
Yeah, when the shooting continued, I was pulled into a neighbour's house. I got split up from my mum. And I was sitting on a chair like similar to this, and I had my eyes closed, sitting with my eyes closed, but I wasn't sleeping, couldn't sleep with the gunfire. And people were coming and going in the house, and there was hushed whispers. Does he know? Has anybody told him? It's awful. And I remember jumping up and saying, what haven't you told me? And running out of the house and running up the street. And still see the tracer bullets. I was running what would have been in line with the gunfire. And my friend's dad, he stepped out and grabbed me. And I'd obviously picked up something from the house. And I was saying, where's my daddy, where's my daddy? And he said, Billy, your daddy's not coming home. Your daddy's dead. And I distinctly remember saying to him, perhaps this is God's will. And he grabbed me by the shoulders, and he nearly shook the life out of me. And he said, listen to me, there is no God. And he used an expletive referring to the Republican community across the road, and he said, it's those across there. He said, never you forget that. And I guess it was from that moment on, God was written out of the equation, you know. And seeing, you know, I realize that my family don't have a monopoly on violence. As I said, many people have been touched by the madness that emanated from Northern Ireland during that 3 decades. You know, Southern Ireland was, you know, bombed, and mainland Britain here was bombed, and so many people touched as a result of that. And not every family reacted the way my family reacted. But I can tell you, we reacted with hate. And that hate was like a cancer. It grew every day.
Yeah. You were, what, 12?
12, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so for you and your family, kind of, I mean, what do you do? Did you attend your dad's funeral?
Yeah. You know, the day my dad was buried was my older brother's 19th birthday.
Wow.
I can still, because my dad was one of the first civilians shot, you know, there's literally thousands crammed into the street. And my mum, just her uncontrollable cries as they were bringing my dad's coffin out of the house. And she had grabbed onto the coffin, the handles, and she was saying, don't take my husband, don't take my husband. And they had to pry her fingers off. And I was standing beside my uncle, and he just sort of put his arm around me and put me into him. And you know, people talk about radicalization today. You know what radicalizes people? And seeing that certainly sows the seeds of hatred and bitterness, you know. My mum was 3 months pregnant, and 6 months later to the day after my dad was killed, my kid brother was born. And I can still remember him as a wee boy running in off the street, running up to my mum and asking what a daddy was. How come his wee friends in the street had a daddy? And where was his daddy? Why didn't he have a daddy? And to see my mum, you know, break down in tears, trying to explain why there was no father figure in the home, you know, just sows those seeds of hatred. There was this insatiable longing for revenge, and it grew. Yeah.
And did you have anyone, I don't know, like kind of counseling or anyone you could talk to about?
You know, Colin, I'm still in touch with my secondary school teacher today. I was with him last Tuesday. And a couple of years ago, he said to me, you know, Billy, after your dad was killed and you came back to school, he said there were things you were writing, there were things that you were drawing in your books, there were things that you were saying which today would set the alarm bells ringing, and it would be flagged up, you know, here's someone with big problems. He said there was nothing like that back then, that they didn't know where to turn. He says we didn't know how to handle it. And like there was no parent-teacher consultations back then. But so it was unheard of that your mum was ever called to school.
Yeah.
But they had my mum up to school, and they were saying, he said, like, we were showing her our books and what you'd been writing. And my mum's response was, well, what do you expect? You know, he just saw his dad, you know, carried home in a bullet-ridden body. You know, what do you expect the child's reaction to be?
Yeah.
So, yeah, there was nothing like that.
So you have all this kind of anger
Yeah.
and bitterness, and so ultimately you decide to put that into action, and you join UVF. Is that
That's
right?
right.
And that stands for.
UVF, Ulster Volunteer Force, initially formed in 1912 during the Home Rule crisis. Which has got a long history. But yeah, at the age of 16, went out on my way to join this organisation. Perhaps of all the loyalist terrorist groups, it was the most ruthless. And I guess, you know, without trying to justify my actions, they were a means to an end. That via my association with this group, I could exact my revenge. It wasn't difficult to join. In the mid-70s, as the troubles were escalating, certainly in working class areas, whether it was loyalist or Republican, I think it was expected of most people to be involved to some degree.
Yeah.
And so I did get involved. Remember the night I joined, the commander of this little unit, he asked us, there was a few of us joined that night, he said, you know, what do you want to do? And I remember saying to him, you know, the only thing I want to do is kill. And he laughed and he made a gesture with his hand and sort of said, you know, there were about 50 or 60 young lads behind him in the bar. And he says, there's about 50 or 60 in front of you. And he said, you'll have to wait your turn. And that's what I found most frustrating. I didn't want to wait my turn. I didn't want to join a queue. But anyway, that was my introduction to the UVF.
Yeah. And so is it a year later you got a chance, I guess, to put it into action?
Yeah, probably just over a year later. I was asked to, well, initially I was asked to shoot this guy, and I was told he's an IRA man. Did I want to do it? And of course I wanted to do it. But then a couple of months later, they came back to me and said, well, actually, it's not an IRA man, it's one of our own men. He's a fellow UVF man. But we think he's an informer. Do you still want to do it? You know, you can pull out if you want. But I felt if I had to pull out, they would have said he's all talk. And besides, you know, at the end of the day, everybody in the organisation knows that if you're an informer, it's an immediate death sentence. So if this guy's informing, then that justifies his execution as far as I was concerned at the time. And so I willingly volunteered. Now, nobody twisted my arm up my back. Nobody forced me to do this. I willingly put my services forward.
And you did end up killing this man, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And you later found out maybe he wasn't an informer, is that right?
Yeah, maybe later, but you know, that's water under the bridge now, unfortunately. I don't mean it to sound as sort of callous as that, but yeah. Thursday, the 19th of February, 1976, along with an accomplice, went out and cold-bloodedly, callously, took the life of another human being. There was no twinge of conscience. There was no sense of remorse. It was just so cold and so hard, so bloody and so brutal.
Yeah, I can't imagine. You later then started learning how to make bombs.
Yeah,
is that correct?
That was sort of in the the whole sort of lead-up period to this process, what I was doing when I was in the organisation. I was taking bomb-making classes simply because you can kill more people with a bomb than you can with a gun. And I felt if I could make my own bombs and plant them, I would kill more of the enemy as I perceived it. Yeah, so there was just, it's hard to put myself back into that mindset now because of change, but obviously back then there was just no reasoning with me. Although, to be honest, I think if I met the 16 or 17-year-old Billy and tried to converse with him in a very warped way, he would have been justifying his actions, and you would have came away thinking, there's something wrong with him. And of course, he would be right, but, I thought it was justified. Yeah. In what I was doing.
Yeah. I don't mean to keep diving into it, but how did you feel? Were you able to sleep after killing this informer, or maybe informer?
Such as the hardness of the heart, yeah. Shooting took place maybe about 7:20 in the morning. It was in a derelict street. As far as we were concerned, we were clean away. Nobody, humanly speaking, saw us doing this. So I think it was about 20 minutes after the shooting, the police actually turned up on the scene. So we were well away. And by the time, certainly going by the police sort of records, by the time the police turned up on the scene, I was in work. As I went about my day's business, as if nothing had happened. Yeah. And there was I felt that I had now proven myself within the organisation. I was going to go on a killing spree. Nothing was going to hold me back. And certainly when, one has gone out and killed someone, certainly within the organisation, your status goes up several notches within the organisation. So all of that was in play at the time.
Then eventually you do get arrested. Mm-hmm. How long after the shooting was that?
It was 2 weeks later.
And was it because of the shooting specifically?
Yeah, well, the weekend before we were out hijacking, and I'd planted a few dummy bombs around the places, but I forgot to wear gloves. So I thought the police had arrested me for these hijackings and sort of dummy explosive devices that we'd planted. So I had all my sort of alibi sort of around these, that hijackings, etc. So when I was arrested, I thought, we'll go into the interview room with these police. That's what they're going to talk to me about. And they come in and, hit me with, where were you on the 19th of February? And practically told us everything about the shooting. And that sort of wrong-footed me. I wasn't ready for that. And so, it was 2 weeks after the event.
Did you ever find out how they knew all that?
Well, when we were sentenced, the police said we were arrested due to information received, which is basically police talk for an informant. So somebody informed on ourselves.
Yeah. Wow. And so you went to Maze Prison, is that right?
Into the infamous Maze Prison. Now, the Maze was opened in 1971 as an internment camp. People that the authorities suspected of being involved in dubious activity but hadn't enough evidence to bring them to trial, so they were arrested without trial and put in the Maze Prison. But as internment was phased out and the troubles escalated, the Maze really became a place that solely held people arrested for terrorist-related activity. And it was run along military lines, really. At that time, we had a prisoner of war type status, although it wasn't called that. So I was placed in a part of the prison that solely held members of the Ulster Volunteer Force, and it was like an army camp. We had our own command structure. The prison authorities weren't allowed in to the compound without first asking permission. If there was going to be a search of the compound, they had to notify us so that anything that with guns and etc. inside, okay, so all of that was well hidden because they weren't allowed into the compound until everything was hidden, and then they were let in to do the search.
So you did have weapons even inside the prison?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's encouraging to hear. Yeah.
And also, we run bomb-making classes inside. Not that we had the actual material wherewithal to make a bomb, but used, substitute material so that when people came out, they were better educated terrorists.
And how are you on the inside during all this? So now you're in Mays prison.
Mm-hmm.
Are you feeling remorseful? Are you still the bitterness from earlier kind of?
No, it's at that time certainly not remorseful. At that time, an element of pride. And going into the maze wasn't a big shock to my system. The type of activity I was involved in, I was either going to end up dead or end up in prison for a very long time. So going into prison wasn't a big shock to my system. What was a shock when I went into prison? I say we sort of had our own part of the prison. So the UVF, were housed in, one part, the provisional IRA were housed in another part, the official IRA, another Republican splinter group was housed in another part, INLA, a Republican Marxist group, housed in another part of this prison. It was huge. I think it was the biggest prison, largest prison in Western Europe. And so you would think that the place where the conflict's going to intensify would be this place. But this was the biggest shock to my system when I went in. The paramilitaries, the terrorist groups, had thrashed out an agreement, and there was stability in prison. So actually the safest place to be was in the maze. Now, it could only happen in Ireland, couldn't it? You think this is the place where it's going to be explosive. Well, actually, there's peace here. Why is there peace? Why aren't we continuing to fight the enemy? Because the enemy's still the enemy, whether it's inside or outside. And, I remember saying that to a guy one night, why isn't the war continuing? And he said, when this place first opened, he said it was a free-for-all. It was, explosive. He said, we realized it couldn't go on, so we thrashed out an agreement. And now he said, anytime you leave the security of this compound, you can leave without fearing for your life. You can go and see your solicitor. You can go to court, and you won't be fearing that you're going to have your life in your hands. You can go down to the family visiting area. You can wear your good clothes. You don't have to go out of this place ready for a fight. And he said, it's no joke sending some mother's son into a visiting room with a black eye. And it hit me like that, the stupidity of it. How much our morals and our values had been warped. I was held in a compound with over 100 fellas, and at least 90% of us had sent some mother's son home to her in a coffin. And here they were all of a sudden worried about black eyes.
Yeah.
I can guarantee you, see, for every son we sent home in a box, their mother would love to have them with a black eye. Yeah, and if these guys could come to an agreement in prison, there has to be an agreement out of prison.
Yeah. Some kind of rapid fire questions.
Go ahead.
I mean, at this point, did you believe there's a God?
Oh, definitely not.
Okay. In prisons, they have like chaplains and that kind of thing. Were you interacting with a chaplain or anything like that?
Nope.
No.
I don't think chaplains were really allowed into UVF compounds. I think we'd banned them.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's in the Maze prison that everything begins to change.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's going to be on the second half. We're about to have a 10-minute break. So at 10 past, we will start again. Please refresh your drinks, grab snacks. Let's hear it for Billy McCurrie.
Okay.
Great. Do come in, grab your seat, get comfortable. So, Billy, you're in the Maze prison. Obviously, now you're a Baptist minister in Ormskirk. So, what happened?
Yes, what happened? Bring you up to 1978, so I'm skipping out a few years. After I was sentenced, I was transferred to the H blocks of the Maze prison. Now, the H blocks were an entirely different kettle of fish to the compound part of the Maze, which I explained to you earlier. Obviously, the authorities were aware of what was taking place in the UVF, UDA compounds, etc. And so they wanted to break that. Hence, the H blocks come into play. And that special category status, that's prisoner of war status, was taken away. So I was transferred to the H blocks. And so out of the H blocks, so those of you who are old enough to remember, you have what was, first of all, the blanket protests where particularly Republican prisoners sat naked in their cells all day, and then it escalated to what they called the dirty protest, where they smeared their excrement on the cell walls, and then finally the hunger strike, which most of you would probably have heard of the hunger strike. So all that happens in the H blocks. I've still no interest in God, still no interest in the things of God. As I said, these guys need to come to an agreement in prison. There has to be an agreement out of prison. So what is the answer? What's the solution? I didn't think it was the Bible. Thought the last thing Ireland needed was religion. So a political situation demanded a political answer, and therefore I went into a study of politics and drifted into left-wing politics, particularly communism, Marxism. Thought Marx is the solution, and studied Marxism. Around about 1978, started to receive magazines from New Zealand. It came in a sort of like a long brown envelope, about that size there. And I remember pulling the contents out of this envelope, and I caught in the corner somewhere the name of Jesus. And I had absolutely no time for God or religion, so I put the contents back inside this envelope and curled it up in a ball and threw it in the waste paper bin. 6 or 8 weeks later, another one of these long brown envelopes with a postmark New Zealand and a New Zealand stamp. Now, friends, see, to this day, I do not know anyone in New Zealand. But these magazines are coming from New Zealand. I'm throwing them in the waste paper bin. And there was a fellow prisoner at this time called Peter Thompson who was professing to be a Christian, and I thought, he could make use of these magazines. And I started to, as they reached me, I would give them straight back into the prison officer's hand and say, give them to Peter Thompson, he's into this religious stuff. And to bring you up to August of 1980, I went out to the medical room for headache tablets, and Peter Thompson was in the medical room. This is the prisoner I was sending these magazines to. And I just happened to say to him, are you getting the magazines I'm sending over to you? I don't know who's sending them, but you're quite welcome to them. I think even before Peter could answer, the medical officer said, oh, do you not think it's God who's sending you these magazines? And I'd never heard anything as stupid in my life. God sending magazines from New Zealand to the Maze prison. And I looked at this medical officer. He became a good friend after it, And I said to him, look, I'm skeptical about God. I don't believe God exists. And 9 out of 10 times, if I had said to a Christian prisoner or a Christian prison officer, I'm skeptical, they would always come back at me with what I now know is a quote from the Psalms, Psalm 14, verse 1, or Psalm 53, verse 1. Both verses are the same. The fool has said in his heart, there's no God. So I was waiting, and this medical officer called me a fool. I was going to get my headache tablets, throw him a line of argument, and get offside. But I remember he looked at me and he said, oh, you're skeptical about God. And I said, yeah, that's right. He's going to call me a fool because he can read these Christians like a book and know exactly what he's going to say to me. You don't believe God exists, he said. I said, yeah, that's right. And he said, here, I want to tell you something, kid. Regardless of whether you believe in God or not, doesn't take away the fact that there is a God. Nor does it take away the fact that if you die in the state you're in at the moment, you're going straight to hell. He says, see, once you get there, kid, you won't be skeptical anymore.
Wow.
Everybody in that place believes. And he said, once you're there, there's no release date. You're there forever. I couldn't hit him with a line of argument for you're a fool.
Yeah.
He wrong-footed me. Wasn't expecting that. And I turned on a hightailed it out of that medical room, you know. And as I thought about it, if there is a heaven and a hell, no, boy, no argument, know where I'm going, if there is. But is there a heaven? Is there a hell? Is there a God? You know, what religion's right? You have Jews, you have Buddhists, you have Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, etc., etc., etc. You know, who's right? Here I am in this prison encountering these Christian prison officers and some Christian prisoners. And what's really annoying about them is their dogmatism. You know, their Jesus is the only Jesus. Their way is the only way. Their Bible's the only Bible. Nobody else gets a look in. You know, such crass arrogance, like. But I guess, you know, a little seed had been sown in my mind, and I started asking lots of questions. And what I can't give an adequate explanation for right up to the present day, and it's as bizarre as this, but this is just how it happened. Those magazines that had been coming on a regular basis every 6 or 8 weeks for about 2 years. After that conversation with Joe Martin in the medical room, I never received another one. That's just how it happened. And it all came to a head on Christmas Eve 1980 when a woman called Gladys Blackburn came down to my cell. Now, Gladys was a retired school teacher. She taught mathematics at Methodist College in Belfast. She was a remarkable woman. She came down to my cell. After a bit of formal conversation, she lifted down a Bible and she began to read from Luke chapter 23, the story of the crucifixion. And the superscription also was written over him in letters of Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. This is the King of the Jews. And one of the thieves, or one of the malefactors which was hanged, railed at him, saying, if you are the Christ, save yourself and us. But the other answering rebuked him, saying, do you not fear God, saying, we are in the same condemnation, and we indeed justly? We receive the due reward of our deeds. We are guilty, but this man has done nothing amiss. And he said unto Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And she stopped at that 42nd verse, and she started to explain what Jesus must have looked like on the cross. You know, the crown of thorns pushed into his head, the beard trailed from his face, his back lacerated as a result of the whipping that he got, stripped naked to humiliate him. Here he is hanging in this middle cross, and does he look like a Lord to you? Because this thief uses a defined title. Does he look like a Lord to you? Because on the cross, Jesus Christ was still Lord. You can still vaguely remember her saying that. Vaguely remember because I can wonder for the very first time in my life what I would term today deep, deep conviction of sin. Now, I couldn't have put it in that sort of terminology back then. It was just as if every wrong that I had ever committed in my life came before me, and I felt the weight of that wrong, that guilt. And I realized also, in tandem with that, the truth of the dying thief statement, this man, referring to Jesus, this man's innocent. He's not guilty. Yeah, I was guilty. I knew that. And realized that Jesus Christ's life was spotless. It was sinless. His life wasn't characterized by all the vile, ugly, repugnant things that characterize my life. And I realized, I think it's only God can do this, that on the cross, Jesus Christ was taking my punishment. He was taking the rap for me. It was all as clear as that in that instant. And all the questions that I've been asking about what religion's right, to be honest with you, all of those questions became irrelevant when I realized that Jesus Christ was dying for me. And that was as personal as that. That Jesus Christ was dying for me on the cross. He was taking the punishment that I deserved in order that I could go free. That was all so clear. And that night, Christmas Eve, 1980, I got down on my knees in the cell. And I threw a wasted life before Almighty God. I repented of my sin. There was no claps of thunder. There was no funny mystical experience or flashes of lightning. It was simple prayer of faith. I guess if there was anything subjective, it was I felt clean afterwards. That might seem strange, but I felt clean after I prayed that prayer.
Do you mind me asking, what did you pray?
Oh boy, I didn't know what to pray. I didn't know how to pray. And Gladys had left me with some little tracts and booklets, and as I flicked through those, there was a sinner's prayer, I think, at the back, a 4-point prayer. And I think I just simply repeated that in faith. About, acknowledging yourself to be a sinner. Yeah. And believing that Jesus Christ died for you. Yes. Those things, there was just, I can't remember the exactly 4 points, but I just prayed that simply by faith. Before Gladys left the cells, she did say, believe in Jesus Christ, etc. And then go out and confess it to others. You can't keep this to yourself. If you become a Christian, you got to confess it to others. That was a bit of a sticking point, that night. But then I realized that if Jesus Christ loved me enough to die for me, surely I love him enough to go out and confess him to others. But I really sort of bottled it on Christmas morning, and I got round of it. I cheated a little bit. The guy in the next cell to me, I was talking to him just the other week on the phone. Michael McGee. Now, this isn't to offend any of the ladies here, but we called him Shirley. And the reason we called him Shirley was because he was a gossip. Anything you told Michael, see, within 5 minutes, the whole of the camp knew about it. So I knew that if I told Shirley McGee, he would tell everybody for me. And that's what I did. So big prison officer Willie Shields opened the cell Christmas morning. I followed Willie next door, and as he opened Michael McGee's cell, I shouted, "I became a Christian last night," and run back into my own cell. And I think he just followed Big Shieldsy down the landing as he opened up those cells and said, "You know what happened to him last night?" So they all came up, and some of them shook me by the hand, some of them wanted to shake me by the throat, but that's how I got around that.
Yeah. So you said you had this experience of kind of feeling clean. Mm-hmm. But you've also got all this kind of hate, bitterness, kind of. Yeah. Is that still there as well?
No, that was remarkable too, because when I started to sort of go on this little sort of political journey, the hate didn't go. It was just channeled in another direction. So all the hate and all the bitterness and all the rage and anger was still there. But that night, when it came, part of becoming clean, that night when I became a Christian, it went like that. Honestly, all that hate just gone. God put his hand down and he threw it away.
And how did your family find out? I guess eventually they had to.
Well, obviously, I write out to my family and tell them what happened. Now, my older sister's response was, anything's better than communism, so this is the next wee phase to get him through his time in prison, so she's thinking this is just another crutch for him for a while. But my mum reacted. She wrote back and said, how could I talk to her about a God of love? How could I talk to her about a God of forgiveness? Where was this great God of love and forgiveness the night your dad was gunned down on the street like a dog by those IRA scum? And she'd onto that line that 3 times. And she had written in a letter how, she had met my dad after he came out of the forces at the end of the Second World War, and all their plans, hopes and dreams for the future, and how it had all been shattered as a result of, what had happened. So where was this great God of love that you're talking about? This all-powerful God? I must have been reading through Romans. Now, this was just a few weeks after I was saved. I must have been reading through Romans because I sat down and I wrote her a letter that night based in Romans 12:19. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay. Explaining that part of certainly my problem and my family's problem was that we thought vengeance belonged to us, that we had the right to go out and take the law into our own hands, and we didn't. Vengeance belongs to God. And I wrote a covering letter to my younger sister who was professing faith, and I said, you get my mum, you make sure you get her to church with you. And it was shortly after that I got a letter from my mum, and she opened it by saying, I now know what you mean about God's forgiveness. Tonight at church I became a Christian. Again, just to see my mum saved and to see that mountain of hatred and bitterness lifted and cast into the depths of the sea of God forgetfulness, it was just amazing. My mum's 90 and she's still singing God's praises, So it's just powerful, the change that came into her life. Other family members, they haven't become Christians, but they've seen the change in my life and my mum's life.
You mentioned, I think before in another interview, your mum and singing.
Yeah.
And how she kind of stopped singing.
Yeah, just as a little boy, before my dad was killed, I remembered my mum going around the house singing. She used to sing country songs, and I've got a love for country music today, and I blame it on my mum. But after my dad was killed, such was the transformation in her life. She stopped singing. She never sang. She said she had nothing to sing about. But after she became a Christian, she started singing again, because God puts the song back into the broken life. And I say she's still singing God's praises today.
It's amazing. Billy, I have to ask you, though. Yeah. I feel like there's got to be some questions here. First of all, how can Jesus kind of forgive you? You murdered a man. How can he kind of forgive you on the cross?
I would say, first of all, the fact that God touches the lives of people like me, it's not such a surprising thing when you read the Bible. God, for millennia, has been in the business of touching the hearts and the lives of people who have murdered, and even using them. The major characters, which even if you're not a churchgoer, you would know of. Moses, that great leader of Israel, who led the children of Israel out of Egypt. Moses was a murderer. King David, who wrote that wonderful 23rd Psalm, "The Lord is my shepherd," one of the greatest king of Israel, David, was a murderer. Paul, to whom we owe the bulk of the New Testament, the Apostle Paul, was party to the first murder of the first Christian martyr. You know, it's not such a strange thing that God, you know, reaches down and touches the lives of people like himself. That the dying thief, you know, most commentators think he was a first century terrorist. God transformed his life, you know, so that's not such a surprising thing. But how can God do it? Because God says the soul that sins, it will die. And every one of us have sinned, okay? So how can God be just and yet justify the guilty? A bit of a contradiction there. You know, how could I, who am guilty, how could I be found not guilty? How's that reconciled? And it's reconciled at the cross, because that's why I said Jesus Christ took the rap, Jesus Christ took the punishment. The judgment that I deserved and that I should have got, it was meted out on Jesus Christ. And because that judgment was meted out in Jesus Christ and he paid the full price, then my debt can be cancelled. The logic of it all resides in the cross.
And what would you say, I mean, for a lot of people here may be thinking, well, you know, I didn't join a terrorist group, I haven't murdered anyone, I'm a pretty good person, so maybe Jesus is for you, but not for me. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I would say it's, you know, God's estimation is the only estimation that counts, right? Now, you may be a good person, you may be a good neighbor, you may be a good husband, you may be a good wife, you may be, humanly speaking, you know, good. But what's God's estimation of you? Because that's the only estimation that counts. So God looks at every one of us, and he says to us, this is my estimation of you. This is what I see. And God says, from the top of your head to the sole of your foot, there's no soundness in you. God looks at you and he says, there's none good. No, not one. Okay, so every one of us have fallen short of God's glory. Every one of us have missed the mark. So on the day of judgment, you know, God's not going to set your life against my life and say, well, you know, how does your life measure up to Billy McCurrie's life? Well, look what he was involved in, and you're so much better, so you're streets ahead of him. God will set your life beside the life of Jesus Christ and say, how does your life measure up to this life? The life of my beloved Son. And his life was perfect. His life was spotless. His life was sinless. So how does your life measure up to that? If your life doesn't measure up to his life, then you also need to come to the place where I came to on the 24th of December 1980. And you also have to repent of your sin. Yeah, you have to repent of your self-righteousness, that you are good enough. When God looks at you and says you are not good enough. And so every one of us need that forgiveness from God through Jesus Christ. He is the way, he is the truth, he is the life. No man comes unto the Father but by him. We're saved not through our own works, our own righteousness. We're saved through the righteousness and the works of another, Jesus Christ.
You mentioned that in some ways you saw in the past kind of Christianity, the Bible, as maybe like a crutch, something psychological to help you cope. I think you mentioned in another interview seeing other Christians in the prison as maybe like that's a way of getting out of prison by showing they've changed, they've got religion. Yeah. What would you say to someone who says kind of, that faith that Jesus is just, it's a psychological crutch, it just helps you deal with your past?
Yeah, because I used to think that, you know, Christianity was a convenient crutch for people in prison to help them through their time in prison. You know, see when I became a Christian, I realized God isn't in the business of handing out crutches. He gave me a new pair of legs where I could stand by myself, you know. But better than that, He gave me a new life. Okay, God is in the business of giving new lives. That's why we talk about being born again. Jesus talked about being born again. And, so when I became a Christian, I got a new life. And, boy, that's amazing to think that God says, okay, I'm taking your old life away and I'm giving you a new life. Is that something psychological? I've been a Christian now, 38 years this year. I think if there hadn't been anything in it, I would have left it behind years ago, decades ago. The fact that I'm still a Christian today is because this is real. I started living when I became a Christian. And I had more freedom in prison with Jesus Christ than some of you folk here tonight who are not Christians and have never come to Christ, never had your sins forgiven. I had more freedom in Christ in prison than some of you have outside without him.
That's a big statement.
Mm-hmm. It's a true one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you ran into members of the IRA, particularly who shot your father now, what would you say to them?
I can honestly say, as I sit here tonight, all that hate, all that bitterness, all that rage, and all that anger has gone. The Republican movement, per se, have never asked for forgiveness. But I don't harbor any hatred or bitterness in my heart. I know there's a day of judgment coming. And I would pray that before that day of judgment comes, that these people come to know the same Savior that I have known, because their eternity without God will be horrendous. But I can also say, if any of the folks who were arrested for my dad's murder, I would expect them to go before the courts and to, have the due process of law meted out. You see, there's a difference between forgiveness and justification. I think sometimes people see the forgiveness side of things, like a moral dilemma. If you say you forgive people who have wronged you, that somehow you're justifying their actions. That's not the case. Forgiveness and justification are entirely different. They were not justified in what they did. They were wrong in what they did. And they should suffer the due process of law should they ever be caught. But that does not negate the fact that within my heart I hold no hatred or bitterness towards them.
Wow. And somewhat kind of in some ways changing from that, but is becoming a Christian always this kind of dramatic?
No. God saves people in his time for his glory. Okay, so, looking back when I see how God worked in my life, the whole process of the Maze prison, etc., I wish, it could have came another way, but, I say God saves in his time for his glory. Don't be sitting waiting on magazines from New Zealand. It doesn't work that way for everybody. That's how it worked in my own life. Sometimes there's a character in the Bible, in the book of Acts, a woman called Lydia, and it says that God opened her heart ever so gently, almost imperceptibly, like a flower opening. God works differently. My wife became a Christian when she was 8 years old, and I would love to sit here tonight and tell you, dear folk, that I became a Christian when I was 8. And God saved me from a life of sin as well as the power of sin. Unfortunately, I can't do that. But if you became a Christian as a young boy or a young girl, Don't think for one moment that you don't have a testimony. You have a testimony that, is equal to or beyond mine. That is a testimony worth shouting from the rooftops. That God saved you as a young boy or young girl and kept you from a life of sin. That is powerful. Never ever lose sight of the privilege of having God spoken to you when you were so young. Whether that was at Sunday school or whether that was sitting at your mother's knee or a grandmother's knee. If you became a Christian as a young boy or a young girl, thank God every day for that, and rejoice in that, and share it every day, because we have a faith worth sharing.
Thank you for that. Mm-hmm. There's a few kind of key dates you've shared in your story. When your father died, and when you kind of had your first mission to kill, I guess, VVF, being arrested and going to the Maze prison, and that Christmas Eve, where you, I guess, prayed for the first time, became a Christian. Which date defines you?
Oh, it's the second birth on the 24th of December, 1980. Because that just gave me a new life, and that has defined me ever since. My attitudes, my values, and my beliefs are shaped on the Word of God. And so that is the date that defines me. And I thank God for that night that He reached down into a cell in H Block 7 of the Maze prison and called the worthless sinner onto Himself and changed my life around completely. Once I was spiritually dead, I had no interest in God, no interest in the things of God, no interest in the Bible, no interest in Christians or meeting with Christians. But then God came crashing into my life, and I found myself wanting to pray, wanting to read the Bible, wanting to go to church. My life was just turned the right way up.
It certainly seems, you certainly seem a different person from the one you're sharing before. Two final questions. The first one just really quick. You're now a minister in a church. Do you do that kind of to make up for what you've done in the past?
No, you could never, ever, atone for the past. Even your self-righteousness, we were talking earlier, people who think they're good enough in God's sight, and God says you need to repent of that self-righteousness. You can never atone for that. So I'm not doing it to make up for a past. Why am I a minister today? Because there is no greater message worth preaching to a lost world and lost souls than Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners. It's a privilege to be doing that. So that's why I'm doing it.
And final question. Some people here, I imagine there's people here of all kind of persuasions as far as maybe already convinced this is true, some kind of interested, intrigued by what you're saying, some really skeptical. What do you say to those kind of second two, intrigued and skeptical, next steps, kind of, what's your advice?
Yeah, I guess, people can come to a meeting like this tonight for a multitude of motives, curiosity, skepticism. What could I say to people like yourselves? All I could say is, look, God says if you seek Him with all your heart, you won't be disappointed. And you've heard, a story tonight about my journey into Christianity. And I would hope, by God's grace, and certainly my prayer, that what you've heard tonight will be a little link in the chain which will lead you down the road to Christ. Don't be afraid to ask questions. God's certainly not afraid of your questions. You can come to church You can ask questions and you can engage with Christians. And, don't be dismissing it out of hand. I would say to you, what is, for the skeptic, what do you put down, what do you put the change in my life down to? I'm saying God came crashing into my life, the God who created us, the God who loves us. I'm saying don't dismiss that God. Embrace him also, and you will also have a life worth living.
Billy, thank you so much. It's been amazing to hear your story and the way God has been working in you and the way he's changed you. Can we just give Billy a round of applause? I just want to encourage you, if what you've heard tonight has really struck you, maybe you've been considering Jesus and the claims of Jesus and the forgiveness he offers on the cross. That is something that you can act on, and you can pray a prayer similar to what Billy prayed. Helps me remember it by ABC, which he actually said, accept Jesus and what he's done for you on the cross, and that you are a sinner who needs rescuing, but that Jesus loves you and died for you on the cross. And believe, put your trust no longer in yourself, but in God and what he has done. And commit your life to living for him, sharing about what he's done in your life. To accept, believe, commit. It's a prayer anyone can pray at any time. Also